Back in 1977, two Boeing 747s were diverted to Tenerife Airport in thick fog. But due to some miscommunication and the poor weather conditions, the two Boeings collided on the runway during takeoff, resulting in the deaths of 583 people. It is still to this day considered the most deadliest accident in aviation history. Now, when the flight box of the aircraft that attempted to take off was retrieved, it was revealed that both the first officer and the flight engineer both recognized something wasn't quite right. But neither officer challenged the captain, who proceeded to take off. Now, it's believed that the captain's authority, alongside his irritation at being diverted and delayed, was a key reason why neither officer said anything. See, the problem with challenging authority is that the benefits are often unclear and delayed, avoiding a possible collision that might never happen, while the costs are immediate and tangible. The captain's anger are being questioned. And so we have a tendency to overweight the costs and underweight the benefits. And so sometimes it can seem easier to say nothing at all, especially when you have to make that call in a split second. In 2013, Google were running an internal project called Aristotle, and they set out to answer the question, what makes a team effective? And they looked at 180 teams across the entire organizations, but they found no mix of personality, skill, or background explained why some teams outperformed others. But what they did find was that what really mattered was less about who was on the team and more about how that team worked together. And specifically, as people that felt confident to take risks were the teams that outperformed the others. In around 1955, NASA were building their prototype Redstone rockets when one went off course and crashed during testing. Now, they did their version of a post-incident review to try and understand what had happened, but the head of the project couldn't find any clues. And this was starting to look like they were going to have to redesign the missile from scratch, costing millions of dollars and people work hours. But then an engineer said they think they knew what happened. And not only that, they think they knew what happened. And they also knew who had caused the accident. Who was it? It was them. When they were working on the rocket, they touched a part of the circuit board with a screwdriver and got a spark. Now, they checked everything and everything looked fine, but maybe that caused the crash. So they went off and did some more testing. And it turned out that was the problem. So what happened to this engineer? Well, a couple of days later, he received a package from the office to his home address. Fearing the worst, he ripped it open immediately to find that it contained a bottle of champagne with a note attached, thanking him for his candor and honesty. Now, what do you think would have happened if this happened in your organization? You'd be rewarded, as this engineer was, or punished by being taken off the project, or worse, fired? Now, the really interesting thing about this story is that that engineer didn't have to say a word, and no one would have known that they caused that rocket to crash. But unaided and unprompted, they put up their hand and said, yes, it was me. So what was it at NASA that enabled that engineer to take such a huge risk and admit to a potentially career-ending mistake? What was that special ingredient at Google that allowed some teams to outperform others? And what was missing from that cockpit of that Boeing 747? Well, before we get into all of that, first a little bit about me. Hello everyone, my name is Jake Gossai, and I work for the BBC. Now, for anyone that hasn't heard of us, I know. I've given this talk quite a few times, and every now and again there is someone in the audience that doesn't actually know who we are. So we're the British Broadcasting Corporation, which basically means we create content that goes out on TV, radio, and the web, with a view to inform, educate, and entertain the British public, all of you. Now, I work on the digital side of the organization, better known as a product group. But more specifically, I work on our on-demand technologies, more commonly known in the UK as iPlayer, our video on-demand service, and Sounds, our audio on-demand service, which are available on multiple platforms such as websites, smart TVs, mobile phones, and smart speakers, which are all supported by dedicated multidisciplinary engineering teams, and are supported by back-end engineering teams that provide all the API to power all these services. Now, I work across the entire department to see how we can do things better. But more specifically, what I'm really interested in is creating a culture of quality, which is one where we don't just inspect for quality by testing for things at the end of the development process, but one in which we look to build quality in at every level that we work. From the products that we build, into the processes that we use to build those products, and into the very interactions of the people who use the processes to build the products. And I call this approach quality engineering. And if you'd like to learn more, check out my newsletter. The way in which I do this is by spending time with teams and seeing how we can do things better, faster, and cheaper. But more importantly, sustainably for those engineering teams. And over the last 6 or so years, I've been talking to lots of different teams and their members about how they work and the problems that they face. And during this time, a key theme kept coming up. They'd all describe scenarios where a problem occurred that could have quite easily been resolved if the people involved had simply spoken to each other. I'd often hear, why can't people just talk to each other? Now, when I delved deeper into this, what I found was that people were unsure how others would react if they said they didn't understand or know something, or what would happen if they admitted to a mistake without first resolving the issue, at which point, why bother admitting it? You solved it now, you might as well just move on. Now, this was resulting in problems that could have quite easily been resolved if the people involved had simply spoken to each other. But things were being left unsaid until they got big enough that no one could ignore it anymore, or what would happen more often than not, slowing the teams down without anyone really understanding why. Now, at the time, I thought the problem was feedback. We just didn't know how to tell each other what was and wasn't working. So my thinking was, if we got better at giving and getting it, we'll be able to solve this problem and get people talking to each other. Now, this was around the time I came across the work of Kim Scott and her book, Radical Candor. Now, if you haven't heard of this, it's a fantastic book on how to get and give feedback. But in it, she referenced the work of another author by the name of Amy Edmondson and her book, The Fearless Organization. Now, in this book, Amy talks about something known as psychological safety. And that's when I understood what I was seeing in our teams, or lack of it in our teams. Now, Amy describes psychological safety as the belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Now, what does this mean? Well, interpersonal risks are anything that make you look or feel ignorant, incompetent, negative, or disruptive. Belief is all about what you think about taking these types of risks. And the work environment, well, that can be any group you're working, for instance, your team. As for why should you care about this? Well, what the Tenerife airport disaster illustrated was that if there was high levels of psychological safety in that flight cabin, the first officer and the flight engineer would have been that much more willing to challenge the captain and checked that they were actually clear for takeoff and perhaps averted that disaster. The NASA Redstone rocket crash showed that if there was high levels of psychological safety leads people to focus on achieving their goals over self-preservation. And Google's Aristotle project found that it was less about who was on the team and more about how that team worked together. And specifically, it was psychological safety that allowed team members to take risks, speak up, and feel confident that no one on the team would embarrass or punish anyone else by asking a question, offering up a partially thought through idea, or admitting to a mistake. And so what these three case studies show is that psychological safety, or the belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, is fundamental for successful teams, helps us to learn from our mistakes, and just goes to show how important speaking up can be. Now, these examples, well, they're not really representative of software engineering teams. Not many of us are flying planes or building rockets. So what does psychological safety have to do with software engineering teams? Well, I think we can all agree that our organizations want high-performing teams. Why? Well, I guess the simplest reason is that they want them to deliver more value. And the higher that performance, the more value they're likely to be able to deliver. But not only that, they also want them to be highly satisfied too. Why? Well, happier people tend to be more productive. But not only that, they're more likely to stick around, more likely to advocate for your company, and more likely to make other people happier too. And research also suggests that both these things are also highly correlated. So when you see an increase in one, the other tends to go up with it. But The work our teams do is complex, meaning that no one person can know it all or do it all. But also, it's not always possible to know how to achieve a specific result or outcome before starting the work. So we work in multidisciplinary teams with developers, testers, delivery managers, project managers, and UX people all working together with our architect and principal thrown in for good measure. And so in order to do the work and become high performing, our teams need to figure out, one, what they need to do, two, how they're going to do it, and three, check that it's actually achieved the result they wanted. And all of this is a continuous process. But in order to go through this cycle effectively, we need to be able to learn from one another. And in order to be able to learn effectively, we need to be able to share, such as what we know, what we don't agree with, things we don't understand, what we don't know, and mistakes we've made. Now, these things, well, they're easy to share because you can better predict how other people react as they feel safe to. But these other things, well, they're hard to share as it feels risky because you don't know how other people will react if they said this thing. Essentially, you need to show vulnerability within a group setting, and that's no easy thing to do. What might they think of you if you would say these things? So, what is it that helps people share their mistakes, what they don't know, what they don't understand, what they don't agree with? Psychological safety, or the belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And so another way to look at all this is about getting people to speak up and take interpersonal risks in our teams in order to get them talking to each other about what is and isn't working. Now, when I was working with teams, I'd often spot when people seemed reluctant to take interpersonal risks. And when I'd mention psychological safety and do they know what it means, everyone would nod and say, yes, they knew what it was. But when I delved deeper into this, what I found was that most people knew what psychological meant, the idea that it's something to do with the mind, and what safety meant, the idea of being protected. And so psychological safety meant protection of the mind, that confident people don't really need it. It's all about creating safe spaces, and all we need to do is trust one another. Now, if you look at the definition of a safe space, which according to Wikipedia is a place intended to be free of bias, conflict, or criticism, or potentially threatening actions, ideas, or conversations, and psychological safety, which is this one at the top of the screen, then safe spaces is going to lead teams down the wrong path. Now, that's not to say that safe spaces are not important. They are, and they are vital for our teams. But psychological safety and safe spaces are really quite different. A safe space to me is almost like a refuge, somewhere you can go and not be challenged or pushed out your comfort zone. It's almost the very notion of being in your comfort zone and feeling safe and protected. Whereas psychological safety is all about taking risks. And that risk can feel uncomfortable. It wouldn't be a risk otherwise. And so psychological safety and safe spaces are not the same thing because you can't take interpersonal risks in an environment that is a safe space. Now, the other problem with framing psychological safety as a safe space is that it can lead people to think that it's all about being super nice, that it's about telling people they've done a good job even when they haven't, as you know, telling them otherwise might hurt their feelings, and giving feedback in only an anonymous form that doesn't allow for any follow-up. And has a tendency to create environments where anything goes, and doesn't matter if you do poorly or well, leads to apathy. But we need to be careful. As people can almost go in the opposite direction too, and start to think about psychological safety is about being upfront about your feedback and telling people any old way, and it starts to lead to people being too blunt with their feedback and not caring how other people react if they hear that they've made a mistake or something hasn't gone as well as they hoped, and that people, you know, should just develop thicker skins. Now, this can lead to overly confrontational environments where people never know how other people react when things don't go well, where people are like to start feeling anxious and leading them to be more risk averse and creating environments where only a certain type of person can survive, pushing teams towards less diversity and less inclusivity. But what we need to be doing is creating environments that lead away from apathy so that people know what is expected of them and that they'll be told when they haven't quite hit the mark without feeling embarrassed or judged, which allows them to be intellectually vulnerable, but also not worried that they're being judged by their peers by being overly negative or disruptive for pointing out issues and mistakes. But we also want environments that lead away from fear, where there's high levels of uncertainty with how other people react if things don't go according to plan, or worry that they're judged by their teams as incompetent or ignorant for admitting a mistake or sharing that they don't know something. Worse, feel as if they're being punished for doing so. What we need is people to feel safe enough to be vulnerable within a group setting so they can start coming out of their comfort zones and take risks. But for them to also know where the boundaries are and understand what is and isn't acceptable in their teams and how they know if they've crossed that line and what the outcome would be if they did. What we need are environments that allow people to do their best work, but also understand how they can get even better. In some ways, psychological safety is about giving people the courage to say those hard to say things so people can start coming out of their comfort zones and start getting uncomfortable. See, the thing about psychological safety and taking interpersonal risk is that it's not a natural act. So how do we go about creating environments that are considered high in psychological safety? Well, there are two core areas for making it happen. The first is leadership that fosters environments high in psychological safety, as people have a natural tendency to look up in the hierarchy towards what is and isn't acceptable. So if your leaders are willing to take interpersonal risks, you are that much more likely to do so too, and even more so if they support you in taking those risks. The second are team members that enable interpersonal risk-taking in our teams and help other people push out their comfort zones and take those risks. Now, how do we do this? Well, by adopting certain mindsets and behaviors. What we need to develop is our curiosity, in that there's always more to learn. We need to develop our humility, in that we don't have all the answers, and our empathy, because speaking up is hard and it needs to be encouraged. But how do we demonstrate these mindsets? Well, before we get into that, I need to make a little confession. The truth is, leadership has by far the biggest impact on psychological safety in terms of creating, maintaining, and sadly destroying it in our teams. But each and every one of us is a leader. Now, I know that's a bit of a cliche. How can we all be leaders if we're all leaders, we'll never get anything done? Often we believe that in order to lead, you must have an official title that recognizes you as a leader, or that someone will tell you you're now the leader, or that culture says that you need to have so much experience in order to lead. There's a way in which we can all lead through micro-leadership. Now, we shouldn't confuse this with micromanagement. That's where a manager tries to control every little task a person does. Micromanagement is all about control based on fear, whereas micro-leadership refers to the act of leadership broken down into tiny moments that we can all demonstrate. And it's all about stepping up and serving others based on empathy and humility. Now, team members, there are certain behaviors that we can all demonstrate that can improve the environment for us and our work colleagues that are all tiny acts of leadership. So what I'd like to do in the next couple of minutes is take a look at how these mindsets and behaviors enable us to all take these tiny acts of leadership. First, let's start by being curious and connecting to the bigger picture. You want to proactively understand what your team's purpose is and connect to it. Do you know the what and the why of your team's purpose? How do your unique skills and abilities aid this purpose? And how do you articulate how you work with others? Additionally, you want to be curious about how your colleagues work. What does and doesn't work for them? Do you know what their aims and objectives are? What aspirations do they have? And how have you supported them in achieving them? The second mindset and behavior you want to demonstrate is humility and learning from failure by showing situational humility, by acknowledging fallibility, by saying you don't have all the answers, by sharing what mistakes you made, what you don't know, what you don't understand, and actively collaborating with your colleagues to find and share what you do and don't know. You also want to proactively give and get feedback by asking for feedback on how you're performing, by providing constructive feedback to those that ask for it, and adopting an open mindset to positively receive feedback. And the final mindset and behavior people want to model is empathy, because speaking up is hard. And so you want to lead by thanking others when they take interpersonal risks and show vulnerability. In particular, when they say they don't know something, when they say they don't understand something, and when they admit to a mistake. And back colleagues up where you can by saying, I can help with that by, I can get involved, I'd like to support you. So how do all these mindsets and behaviors help support teams with psychological safety? Well, being curious about others shows that you're interested in them and helps build stronger relationships and demonstrates that we all have valuable insights to share. Showing humility helps people see that everyone makes mistakes and that we don't know everything, and that encourages others to take interpersonal risks. And being empathetic when other people speak up shows that nothing bad happens when they do, and therefore supports others in taking interpersonal risks in our teams. Now, these are all learnable skills. Practicing active listening and asking better questions can help you be curious without looking like you're prying into people's lives. Learning about failure and how you can help develop your humility and diving deeper into how to get, give, and understand feedback can not only help you improve, but also your work colleagues. And developing your emotional intelligence and metacognition, thinking about your thinking, can help us understand how uncertainty affects us and helps us be more empathetic to others. And it's through our collective actions and driven by each of us adopting these mindsets and behaviors that all of us can contribute towards increasing psychological safety in our teams and make it that much more likely that people are willing to take interpersonal risks and share those hard to share things. So to recap, what did we cover today? I began with why I started looking at psychological safety, because I was puzzled by why people couldn't speak up in our teams. I then defined what psychological safety meant, which in its simplest form is about people being able to take interpersonal risks. We then looked at some case studies of a lack of psychological safety that resulted in some tragic consequences, but also how high levels result in accelerated problem solving and performance. I then went over why we need it in our engineering teams, because we need to be able to share what we do and don't know, and why some people may be reluctant to share those things. I then detailed some common misunderstandings of psychological safety, such as it's not about safe spaces, it's not about being too nice or too blunt, and that confident people need it too. And then finally, the 3 core mindsets we need to develop in order to start fostering psychological safety in our teams. So to finish, our organizations want high-performing teams in order to deliver value to their organizations and customers. But our work is complex due to no one person knowing it all or doing it all. And the best way to work through that complexity is for our team members to speak up about what they know, but also what they don't know, things they don't understand, mistakes they made, and things they don't agree with. We also learn that speaking up is fundamental for high-performing teams. It enables us to learn from our mistakes, but if people don't or can't speak up, then we risk not hearing valuable information until it's too late. So what is it that enables people to speak up? The belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, better known as psychological safety, or the link between complexity, speaking up, and high-performing teams. So thank you very much for listening to me today. If you'd like to learn more, then check out this link at the bottom, and you can also check out my newsletter where I talk about this and many other topics.